The Women's Prize is back and I could not be more excited, so let's do some predictions for the fiction longlist. Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. I am a really big fan of the Women's Prize, and so I am thrilled that we get the excitement of a new year and a new long list to obsess over. I'm also a fan of making shoddy predictions. Last year I had a go at guessing the 16 books that I thought we might see, and I ended up getting only 4 right, which, to be fair, did include the winner, Demon Copperhead. That's not too bad, but I think there's definitely room for improvement. And with that in mind, I'm having another go this year at guessing which 16 books I think could claim a spot on that long list that's soon to be announced. I've got my fingers crossed that all of the books I've picked are actually eligible for the prize, but I did make a boo-boo last year and included one that was released outside of the eligibility window. If you're wondering what makes a book eligible, then let's do a quick run through of the eligibility criteria for the 2024 prize. It must be written by a woman, it must be written in English, so no translations are eligible, it must be a full-length novel. So the Women's Prize specifies that short story collections are not permitted, and is also fairly unique in that it also specifies a minimum word count of 30,000 words. There are quite a few well-received short novels out there like Study for Obedience and Orbital and Western Lane and Clear, and without any widely published word counts, it's actually quite hard to know if those are eligible or not. There are a few tools online that estimate based on the audiobook length, which kind of suggests that all of these books are eligible, but it's really hard to be 100% certain. The book must have been published in the UK between the 1st of April 2023 and the 31st of March 2024. That means some well-liked books that you might expect to see on the list aren't actually eligible this year because they were released a little bit too early. One example of that is In Memoriam by Alice Wynne, which I had kind of expected to be a big Women's Prize contender, but it actually would have appeared on last year's list. There are also some more complicated rules around the publishing house being established in the UK and some limits on how many books each publisher can submit based on their previous performance, which kind of moves things a little bit closer to how the Booker Prize works. However, one notable thing in all of that complexity is that authors who have been shortlisted in the last 10 years or who have won the prize previously in any year get a free pass, and that means their book can be submitted to the prize in addition to any quotas that the publisher faces otherwise. And there are a lot of previous winners with eligible books this year, including the second ever winner of the prize, Anne Michaels, she won in 1997, Linda Grant, who won in 2000, Anne Patchett, who won in 2002, Valerie Martin, who won in 2003, Zadie Smith, who won in 2006, Rose Tremaine, who won in 2008, and then much more recently, Naomi Alderman, who won in 2017. I think there are like 6 or 7 previous shortlistees as well, so potentially the entire long list could be made up of writers previously rewarded by the prize. A spoiler for my predictions though, that I'm not really playing it that safe, so you will only see one of those authors in my list. Let's also touch briefly on the judging panel, which is made up of 5 judges. This year's chair of judges is Monica Ali. She's an author best known for her Booker shortlisted Brick Lane. Ayobami Adebayo is another author. She was longlisted for last year's Booker Prize and previously shortlisted for the Women's Prize. The next judge, Laura Dockrell, is someone I'm not super familiar with, but she seems to have a bunch of strings to her bow, and she's listed on the Women's Prize website as an author, illustrator, scriptwriter, and a performance poet. And kind of iconically, when the judges were asked to describe themselves as a reader in one word, all the other judges said things like voracious and empathetic, and she said
greedy?
Indira Varma is an actress and she's been in so many things that I've really loved. She was in Game of Thrones back when it was still good. She was in a comedy drama show called This Way Up, which I absolutely loved. But she's also been in Obi-Wan Kenobi and is going to be in the upcoming series of Doctor Who. And finally, Anna Whitehouse is a podcast host, author and content creator who does a lot of stuff around parenting and women's issues. It's a pretty solid lineup and we're relying on these judges to deliver the goods. On to the books then, and as ever, I've split these into a number of themed categories just to make it a little bit more interesting. My first category is called Blood Ties, and these are all books centered in one way or another around a family relationship. My first pick is Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. This is a book I want to see on the list just so it can get a little bit of well-deserved justice and recognition, because it was one of the best books I read last year. This is an Irish novel written from the perspective of a mother, and she addresses it directly to her young son, and it just captures the barrel of emotions that is early motherhood so brilliantly. I've obviously never been a mother to a young child, but I've never read something that brought it to life so well. It just captures the completely opposing emotions of love and frustration, of joy and fear. I loved loved this book, and it would be a very worthy winner of the prize, let alone a nominee. My next pick is The Lagos Wife by Vanessa Walters. This one is marketed as a bit of a literary thriller, and I'm partly calling that out because the Women's Prize explicitly encourages submissions from all genres. It's a book set in Nigeria about a woman who seems to have the perfect life until she disappears and the investigation goes cold. Her aunt takes things into her own hands to discover the truth, but gets more than she bargained for. I really enjoy what I've read of Nigerian fiction, and with Ayobami Adebayo on the judging panel, I'm hoping that she can be a great champion for it and we might see some Nigerian fiction on the list. I'm sure there are a few that are eligible, but this is the one that I've gone for. Then I've picked Dominoes by Phoebe McIntosh. Now, the premise of this book sounds absolutely brilliant. It's about a couple, a black woman and a white man, who by coincidence already have the same surname. So when they get engaged, it's like a bit of a running joke that they won't need to do all of the admin that usually comes after getting married. I have only just changed my name 18 months after getting married, so I know how much of a hassle it is. However, it soon comes to light that the reason they have the same name is connected to their ancestors and the slave trade, and the novel explores how their romance intersects with race and class. It sounds like such a brilliant, thought-provoking concept, and I'm itching to know if the execution does it justice. Interestingly, this is a novelisation of Mackintosh's one-woman play also called Dominoes, but it's not the only novelisation of a one-woman play in the running, because the play Prima Facie, famously performed by Jodie Comer to great critical acclaim, has also been turned into a novel being released in the eligibility window. That one hasn't made my predictions, but it could well end up on the long list we get. Next is In Memory of Us by Josephine Roy. This is about a set of mixed race twins who are conjoined at birth and then separated, and it tells their story across two time periods. They're growing up in the 50s and 60s in a London that's quite hostile to them, and then in the modern day when one of the twins has early stage dementia and is piecing together her memories and untangling her past. It's supposed to be quite pacey and twisty, but also a fascinating and beautiful exploration of memory. The next category is called Hidden History, and these are historical fiction novels that tell stories of times and places that we don't normally read about quite so often. It's shining a light on these untold histories. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about including so much historical fiction on my predictions list because the Women's Prize doesn't tend to have quite this much, but it's been such a big year for high profile historical fiction that I thought I'd just roll with it. My first pick is Loot by Tanya James. This is a decades and continents spanning novel set in the late 18th and early 19th centuries about the imagined origin story of a famous, enormous mechanical toy of a tiger biting a European man. It's called Tipu's Tiger, and you can actually go and see it in the V&A Museum in London. This is a story that starts out in India and is one of craft and pedagogy, but it transforms into something of a well-mannered heist. I liked this one. I think it screamed Women's Prize to me when I read it, and it's already had some critical success because it appeared on the long list for the National Book Award last year. Now, this next pick is one that I liked a little bit less, but last year when I did my predictions, I thought I was being a little bit clever by ignoring a Titanic release by a former winner, Maggie O'Farrell's The Marriage Portrait, and it ended up being on the list, and so I didn't want to make the same mistake again. So this next prediction is The Fraud by Zadie Smith. This is Smith's first historical novel, the story of which is somewhat in orbit around a really famous trial that took place in Victorian England about a man who tried to claim he was the heir to a fortune who had been missing, presumed dead. I say it's in orbit around that trial because although it seems to present itself as being about the trial, it's actually about a woman who takes an interest in the case, and particularly takes an interest in a black man called Andrew Bogle who vouches for this fraud despite the preposterousness of his claim. I found this one a little bit too disjointed for my taste, but it has its fans and I think it could well be on the long list. Then I've picked The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan. I read this one recently and it certainly was a page turner, if a little fanciful at times. It's set in the 30s and 40s in Malaysia, and it centres around a family impacted by colonialism and by the war and their own family drama. It's told from the 4 different family members' perspectives, but the main one is the mother Cecily, who in the 30s is seduced into a life of espionage on behalf of Japanese colonialists trying to usurp British colonialists, and then in the 1940s as she reckons with some of the impacts of her choices in the dying days of the Second World War. It packs quite a lot into quite a lean narrative, and I can can really imagine it becoming a book club favourite when it comes out in paperback. Okay, the next category is retellings. These are novels that all retell or reclaim a story in one way or another, and I think we've seen a lot of success in these types of stories recently, not least last year's winner of this prize, Demon Copperhead. The first book in this grouping is Julia by Sandra Newman. So Newman, I think, along with Zadie Smith, is starting to feel like a little bit of a favourite in the race at the moment, and it would feel really silly to leave this one out. This is a retelling of George Orwell's 1984, told from the perspective of Julia, who is the love interest of the original novel's main character, Winston Smith. This has been getting mostly positive reviews, and I'm really keen to get to it regardless of whether it's longlisted for the prize. And big props to Sandra Newman for making a comeback for the ages after her pretty widely panned previous novel, The Men. Very excited for this one. My next pick is a Greek myth retelling. And so there is very often a Greek myth retelling on the list, and there are a number of them that have been released in the eligibility window, including Jennifer Saint's Atalanta and the forthcoming Medea by Rosie Hewlett. My pick, though, is Herc by Phoenicia Rogerson. And I'm choosing this one because it seems quite formally interesting. This is the story of Hercules, not told from his perspective, but as told by those who knew him. So from the perspectives of his wives, his friends, his children. It sounds wildly entertaining and a really nice spin on a formula that for some readers might seem like it's becoming a bit tired. Then I've picked Remember Remember by Elle McRae. This one isn't actually out until the end of February, but it's been getting rave reviews by readers of advanced copies, and McRae was recently featured in the pretty influential Observer list of the 10 best new novelists for 2024. Last year that list included Jacqueline Crooks, who, as we know, ended up being a Women's Prize nominee. This one's an alternative history set in the late 18th century, in which a woman who was a former slave and her brother, who has been failed by the justice system, take inspiration from the gunpowder plot to try and bring an explosive end to the transatlantic slave trade. I think this sounds absolutely fantastic. The next category I'm calling careering, and that's because these books to some extent centre around the workplace, but also because these characters' lives seem to be careering out of control. My first pick here is The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is another Irish book that seems to have simultaneously gone under the radar, but also appeared on lots and lots of people's best books of the year list. This is about a woman called Rachel that starts out when Rachel is in her 30s, but is primarily told in her final year of university and just after, when she falls into the orbit of a very charismatic, closeted gay man called James, as well as falling in love with her enigmatic English professor, who she decides she wants to have an affair with, and things just escalate from there. Then I've picked Jaded by Ella Lee. This is a recent release about a successful young lawyer who has everything going for her until she suffers an unspeakable attack after a work event, and she kind of finds that everyone she thought she could rely on either blames her or expects her to stay quiet. I've seen it compared to the TV show If I May Destroy You, which I absolutely loved, and so I've got very high hopes for this. Finally, I think we might see Good Material by Dolly Alderton on the list. This is about a man whose girlfriend of 4 years has suddenly broken up with him, and he finds himself trying to figure out why, and he's trying to reassess his life and his career as a stand-up comedian, and also deal with the breakup and all that comes with it, including reconnecting with old friends and moving out of his home. I found this tons of fun and really funny, and as a recovering Dolly Dodger, I'm happy to champion this for the Women's Prize. My final category I'm calling Bodies, 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 and these are all books that deal in some way with the human body. And interestingly, I've got 3 picks here, and they all deal with bodies in completely different ways. To introduce the first of these books, a while ago I put out a fairly cryptic but kind of obnoxious post on my Instagram stories saying that I thought I'd found the winner of the Women's Prize. I'm sorry about that, I just got a little bit excited. But when I started doing some research for this video, I came across this book which I had never heard of before, and it just sounded absolutely fantastic to me, like a fully catnip concept for me. And the book I'm talking about is The Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor. This is a novel set a couple of hundred years from now, when a woman walks into a tattoo parlour in Hackney and has an unusual request for one final tattoo. She wants a thin line drawn on her body to link all of the other tattoos she has. And as she has this work done, she tells the story of each of her tattoos. These form something of a map of her own experiences and those of women both past, present and future. This is actually my current read. I'm only 80 pages in, but I am loving it so far, and it is just so boldly imaginative. I think this attempt to run the entire gamut of women's experiences feels like the sort of ambitious book that would be perfect for the prize. Next is a book not about body art, but about physicality, and that is Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. This is a novel whose central conceit is a women's boxing tournament, and it's told through a series of showdowns between women in bouts against against one another. I'm thinking about this one for a couple of reasons. First, there's often an indie title or two in the mix, and this is one from Daunt Publishing. And then the other reason is that at least in the UK, it feels like women's sport is having a real breakthrough moment, largely owed to the success of the women's football team. And it just feels like a book about women's sport could be one that is surprising but also make a lot of sense. Finally, I've picked a book that focuses on the mortality of our bodies, and that's The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mickey Brammer. This one is about a woman in New York who is a death doula, which is basically a companion for those going through a terminal illness, and they're there to help work through the process of dying. She's stuck in a bit of a rut in her own life, but that's until she meets a new client, a feisty older lady with one last wish, and together they go on a bit of an adventure. This one's described as warm and uplifting, but also seems to be dealing with some pretty heavy issues of death and dying, and it strikes me as exactly the vibe that the Women's Prize tends to go for. So those are my 16 picks for the prize. The list we get will probably look completely different, but I had fun putting it together and I hope you enjoyed watching it. I'd love to hear down in the comments if there are any books here that you've read and enjoyed, and also I'd like to hear what your picks for the Women's Prize fiction long list are. Which books do you think deserve to make an appearance? Do let me know and we can have a chat about it. Once the long list is announced, I'll be back with a reaction video for that, and I've also got some predictions coming up for the International Booker Prize, so if you'd like to see those, make sure you subscribed and keep your eyes peeled. But until next time, toodles!